The armed forces of the Russian Federation, commonly referred to as the Russian Armed Forces, comprise the military of Russia. In terms of active duty personnel, they are the world's fifth largest military force, with at least 2 million reserve personnel. Their branches consist of the ground forces, the Navy, and the aerospace forces, as well as 3 independent arms of service, the strategic rocket forces, the airborne forces, and the special operations forces. Russia is recognized by the Non-Proliferation Treaty as one of the 5 major nuclear-armed countries. The Russian armed forces possess the world's largest stockpile of nuclear weapons. They operate the second-largest fleet of ballistic missile submarines, and are one of only 3 national militaries that operate strategic bombers. In 2021, Russia had the world's 5th highest military expenditure at $65.9 billion. With certain exceptions, Russian law mandates 1 year of military service for all male citizens aged 18-27, though conscripts are generally not deployed outside of Russia. In spite of Russia's potential military capabilities, deficiencies have been noted in its combat performance on both the tactical and operational scales. During the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine, severe logistical failures have impacted the performance of Russian troops as different service branches have struggled to coordinate and work together, leading to significant losses of occupied/annexed territory. Researchers from the RAND Corporation have observed that the Russian military has a problem with professionalization. Directly controlled by the Security Council of Russia, the Russian armed forces form part of the country's defense services under Russian law, fulfilling this capacity alongside the Border Guard of the Federal Security Service, the National Guard, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the Federal Protective Service, the Foreign Intelligence Service, and the Ministry of Emergency Situations. Service branches. Armed forces under the Ministry of Defense are divided into the 3 branches of armed forces, the ground forces, aerospace forces, and Navy. The 2 separate troop branches, the strategic rocket forces and airborne forces. The special forces of armed forces, the special operations forces. The logistical support, which has a separate status of its own. There are additionally 2 further separate troop branches, the National Guard and the Border Service. These retain the legal status of armed forces, while falling outside of the jurisdiction of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation. The National Guard is formed on the basis of the former internal troops of Russia. The new structure has been detached from the Ministry of Internal Affairs into a separate agency, directly subordinated to the President of Russia. The Border Service is a paramilitary organization of the Federal Security Service, the country's main internal intelligence agency. Both organizations have significant wartime tasks in addition to their main peacetime activities and operate their own land, air, and maritime units. The number of personnel is specified by decree of the President of Russia. On January 1, 2008, a number of 2,019,629 units, including military of 1,134,800 units, was set. In 2010, the International Institute for Strategic Studies estimated that the Russian armed forces numbered about 1,027,000 active troops and in the region of 2,035,000 reserves. As opposed to personnel specified by decree, actual personnel numbers on the payroll was reported by the Audit Chamber of Russia as 766,000 in October 2013. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, between 2005-2009 and 2010-2014, Russian exports of major weapons increased by 37%. Russia spent $66.4 billion on arms in 2015, then $69.2 billion in 2016, having taken third place. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, the share of modern weaponry in service with Russia's army and fleet amounts to 71.2% with serviceability of weapons at 99% as of 2021. History. The Soviet Union officially dissolved on December 25, 1991. For the next year various attempts to keep its unity and to transform it into the military of the Commonwealth of Independent States failed. Over time, some units stationed in the newly independent republics swore loyalty to their new national governments, while a series of treaties between the newly independent states divided up the military's assets. Apart from assuming control of the bulk of the former Soviet internal troops and the KGB border troops, seemingly the only independent defense move the new Russian government made before March 1992 involved announcing the establishment of a National Guard. Until 1995, it was planned to form at least 11 brigades numbering 3,000 to 5,000 each, with a total of no more than 100,000. National Guard military units were to be deployed in 10 regions, including in Moscow, and a number of other important cities and regions. By the end of September 1991 in Moscow the National Guard was about 15,000 strong, mostly consisting of former Soviet Armed Forces servicemen. In the end, President Yeltsin tabled a decree on the temporary position of the Russian Guard, but it was not put into practice. After signing the Belovezh Accords on December 21, 1991, the countries of the newly formed CIS signed a protocol on the temporary appointment of Marshal of Aviation Yevgeny Shaposhnikov as Minister of Defense and Commander of the Armed Forces in their territory, including strategic nuclear forces. On February 14, 1992 Shaposhnikov formally became Supreme Commander of the CIS Armed Forces. On March 16, 1992 a decree by Boris Yeltsin created the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, the operational control of Allied High Command and the Ministry of Defense, which was headed by President. Finally, on May 7, 1992, Yeltsin signed a decree establishing the armed forces and Yeltsin assumed the duties of the Supreme Commander. In May 1992, General Colonel Pavel Grachev became the Minister of Defense, and was made Russia's first army general on assuming the post. By August or December 1993 CIS military structures had become CIS military cooperation structures with all real influence lost. In the next few years, Russian forces withdrew from Central and Eastern Europe, as well as from some newly independent post-Soviet republics. While in most places the withdrawal took place without any problems, the Russian armed forces remained in some disputed areas such as the Sevastopol naval base in the Crimea as well as in Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and in Transnistria. The armed forces have several bases in foreign countries, especially on territory of the former Soviet republics. On February 24, 2022 Russian President Vladimir Putin gave the execute order for the armed forces to begin the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine. On April 10, 2022 General Alexander Dvornikov assumed command of the operation. In July 2022, at the same time as the armed forces began suffering severe casualties, the ground forces began to sight ammunition in or near structures which are frequented by civilians due to the human shield benefit, ostensibly because Ukrainian HIMARS had tilted the odds of his strategy of attrition by artillery. Within hours after Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu's signature on the unbrokered deal to resume Ukraine's Black Sea grain exports, Russia bombed the port of Odessa. According to Forbes, Moscow had committed, as of the end of July 2022, 10 of its combined arms armies to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Structure. The Defense Ministry of the Russian Federation serves as the administrative body of the armed forces. Since Soviet times, the General Staff has acted as the main commanding and supervising body of the Russian armed forces. U.S. expert William Odom said in 1998, that the Soviet General Staff without the MOD is conceivable, but the MOD without the General Staff is not. Other departments include the main Intelligence Directorate, the Personnel Directorate as well as the rear of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, railway troops, signal troops, and construction troops. The Chief of the General Staff is currently General of the Army Valery Gerasimov. Since December 1, 2012, the structure of the Ministry of Defense has been containing the main directorate of the military police, to which all military districts' regional directorates of military police are subordinated. In July 2018, the main military political directorate of the Russian armed forces was created, restoring a responsibility for ideological training that had been done away with in the Soviet armed forces. The Russian military is divided into three services: the Russian ground forces, the Russian Navy, and the Russian aerospace forces. In addition, there are two independent arms of service, the strategic missile troops and the Russian airborne troops. The armed forces as a whole are traditionally referred to as the Army, except in some cases, the Navy is specifically singled out. Military districts. Since late 2010, the ground forces as well as the aerospace forces and Navy are distributed among four military districts: Western Military District, Southern Military District, Central Military District, and the Eastern Military District, which also constitute four joint strategic commands: West, South, Central, and East. Previously, from 1992 to 2010, the ground forces were divided into six military districts: Moscow, Leningrad, North Caucasian, Privolzhsk-Ural, Siberian and Far Eastern, with the 7th Military District, Kaliningrad, formed in 1997, in service until 2010. Russia's 4 naval fleets and 1 flotilla were organizations on par with the ground forces military districts. These 7 MDS were merged into the 4 new MDS, which now also incorporate the aerospace forces and naval forces. There is one remaining Russian military base, the 102nd Military Base, in Armenia, left of the former Transcaucasus Group of Forces, and is incorporated into the Southern Military District. In mid-2010 a reorganization was announced which consolidated military districts and the Navy's fleets into 4 joint strategic commands. In 2014 the Northern Fleet was reorganized in separate Joint Strategic Command. Since January 1, 2021, this command has the status of military district. Geographically divided, the 5 commands/districts are: Joint Strategic Command West Western Military District, includes the Baltic Fleet. Joint Strategic Command North Northern Military District, includes the Northern Fleet. Joint Strategic Command South Southern Military District includes the Black Sea Fleet and Caspian Flotilla. Joint Strategic Command Center Central Military District. Joint Strategic Command East Eastern Military District, includes the Pacific Fleet. The plan was put in place on December 1, 2010 and mirrors a proposed reorganization by former Chief of the General Staff Army General Yuri Bolyuyevsky for a Regional Command East, which was not implemented. The 4 commands were set up by a decree of President Medvedev on July 14, 2010. In July 2011, an Operational Strategic Command of Missile Space Defense has also been established on the basis of the former Special Purpose Command of the Russian Air Force. A presidential decree of January 2011 named commanders for several of the new organizational structures. Russian military command posts, according to globalsecurity.org, include Chekhov/Sharapovo, about 80 kilometers south of Moscow, for the General Staff and President, Chadaevka near Penza, Voronovo in Moscow, and a facility at Lipetsk all for the national leadership, Yamantau in the Urals, and command posts for the strategic rocket forces at Kuntseva in Moscow and Koavinsky Mountain in the Urals. It is speculated that many of the Moscow bunkers are linked by the special underground Moscow Metro 2 line. Russian security bodies not under the control of the Ministry of Defense include the internal troops of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the Border Guard Service of Russia, the Kremlin Regiment and the rest of the Federal Protective Service, and the Ministry of Emergency Situations, the country's civil defense service since 1995 and successor to earlier civil defense units. Naval fleets. The Navy consists of 4 fleets and 1 flotilla. Northern Fleet forms own Joint Strategic Command. Baltic Fleet subordinated to Joint Strategic Command West. Black Sea Fleet subordinated to Joint Strategic Command South. Pacific Fleet subordinated to Joint Strategic Command East. Caspian Flotilla subordinated to Joint Strategic Command South. The Kaliningrad Special Region, under the command of the Commander Baltic Fleet, comprises ground and coastal forces, formerly the 11th Guards Army and now the 11th Army Corps with a Motor Rifle Division HQ and subordinate units, as well as naval aviation regiments employing Sukhoi Su-27 flankers and other combat aircraft. As noted, both the Baltic Fleet and the 11th Army Corps in Kaliningrad are subordinate to Strategic Command West. Similarly, the Northeast Group of troops and forces, headquartered at Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, comprises all Russian armed forces components in the Kamchatka Krai and the Chukotka Autonomous Okrug and is subordinate to the Commander Pacific Fleet headquartered in Vladivostok. Personnel. Conscription is used in Russia, the term of service is 12 months, and the eligible age is between 18 and 27 years old. Deferments are provided to undergraduate and graduate students, men supporting disabled relatives, parents of at least 2 children, and upon presidential proclamation to some employees of military-oriented enterprises. Men holding a Ph.D., as well as sons and brothers of servicemen killed or disabled during their military service, are released from conscription. There were widespread problems with hazing in the army, known as dedovshchina, where first-year draftees are abused by second-year draftees, a practice that appeared in its current form after the change to a 2-year service term in 1967. According to Anna Politkovskaya, in 2002, a complete battalion, more than 500 men, had been killed not by enemy fire but by beatings. To combat this problem, a new decree was signed in March 2007, which cut the conscription service term from 24 to 18 months. The term was cut further to 1 year on January 1, 2008. 30% of Russian armed forces personnel were contract servicemen at the end of 2005. For the foreseeable future, the armed forces will be a mixed contract/conscript force. The Russian armed forces need to maintain a mobilization reserve to have manning resources capable of reinforcing the permanent readiness forces if the permanent readiness forces cannot deter or suppress an armed conflict on their own. Nearly 400,000 contractors serve in the Russian army as of March 2019. According to Defense Minister Shoigu, in every regiment and brigade, 2 battalions are formed by contractors, while 1 is formed by recruits, who are not involved in combat missions. Currently, there are 136 battalion tactical groups in the armed forces formed by contractors. The number of conscripts amounts to 225,000 and the number of contractors amounts to 405,000 as of March 2020 and exceeds the number of conscripts by 2 times as of the end of 2021. Recruitment into the Russian military are also open to non-Russian citizens of the Commonwealth of Independent States, of which Russia is the largest member. By December 2003, the Russian parliament had approved a law in principle to permit the armed forces to employ foreign nationals on contract by offering them Russian citizenship after several years' service. Yet, up to 2010, foreigners could only serve in Russia's armed forces after getting a Russian passport. Under a 2010 Defense Ministry plan, foreigners without dual citizenship would be able to sign up for 5-year contracts and will be eligible for Russian citizenship after serving 3 years. The change could open the way for CIS citizens to get fast-track Russian citizenship, and counter the effects of Russia's demographic crisis on its army recruitment. Each soldier in duty receives an identity card of the Russian armed forces. Awards and decorations of the armed forces are covered at the awards and emblems of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. On November 17, 2011, General Nikolai Makarov said that Russia had reached a crisis in the conscript service where there simply were not sufficient able-bodied men to draft and was forced to have its conscription. Military draft dodging declined 66% since 2012 and as of March 2019. It is reported that about 80% of the young people who were drafted into the ranks of the Russian armed forces in the autumn of 2018 were found fit for military service. According to the head of the mobilization, in recent years, the fitness of future recruits has increased by 7%. In March 2013, Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu promised that all army quarters would have showers by the end of the year. RIA also said that the shower plans were the latest in a series of creature comfort improvements the Defense Ministry had recently announced. In mid-January, Shoigu said he would rid the army of its antiquated foot wraps, or portyanki, and a few days later the designer of Russia's new army uniform said that the ear-flap hats traditionally worn in winter would be replaced with more modern headgear. The Russian military's Ushanksa hats were improved between 2013 and 2015, when the Russian armed forces were being equipped with new uniforms. The new version of the traditional, and somewhat stereotypical, hat features better heat insulation and longer ear flaps. A new uniform for hot climates was introduced in mid-2018. On May 28, 2022, on the background of the ongoing invasion of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin signed the law which removed the upper age limit for signing first contract for the performance of voluntary military service. Military education. The Russian military education system, inherited from the Soviet Union, trains officer specialists in narrowly defined military occupational specialties. In this it differs greatly from the American military education system in which newly qualified second lieutenants receive particular specialties in the framework of their career branch only after graduation from a military academy or the ROTC. Students of Russian civilian institutions of higher education wishing to join the Reserve Officer Training Program can't choose a military occupational specialty, because each civilian specialty taught by civilian university is attached to a particular military occupational specialty taught by the Military Training Center of the same university by the rector's order. It also differs from the American military education system in which students can choose between available types of ROTC. The Russian military education system includes warrant officer schools, which prepare career warrant officers for active duty service. Higher military schools, which prepare career commissioned officers for active duty service as platoon/company commanders and at equivalent positions. Military training centers within civilian institutions of higher education, which prepare reserve commissioned officers who can serve as platoon/company commanders and at equivalent positions. Military academies, which improve the military occupational specialty knowledge of commissioned officers to allow them to be appointed to battalion/regiment/brigade commander or equivalent positions. Military Academy of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Russia, which improves skills of officers graduated from military academies to allow them to become highest-ranking military officers. Adjunctura is a military analog of civilian graduate school, which allow commissioned officers to get academic degree of candidate of sciences in military-oriented specialties and be appointed to a teaching positions in military academies, military schools, military training centers. Reserve components. Russian armed forces have reserves which includes two components. Active reserve, mobilization human reserve. Inactive reserve, mobilization human resource. By default, at the end of active duty each military personnel is enrolled as a mobilization human resource. This applies equally to conscripts and volunteers regardless of ranks. Furthermore, graduates of civilian institutions of higher education, who have graduated the military training centers of their alma maters, trained under Reserve Officer Program, are enrolled as mobilization human resources after their promotion to officer's rank. Mobilization human resource are replenished with males who reach the age of 27 years old and were not in military service for any reason. Enrolling in the mobilization human reserve is voluntary and implies the special contract. This possibility is available for each persons who is in the mobilization human resource already. The initial contract is concluded for 3 years period. Military personnel of mobilization human reserve perform part-time duties in military units. Reservists are appointed to a military position in particular military units and are involved in all operational, mobilization, and combat activities of these military units. As a rule, in peacetime time reservists perform their duties 2-3 days per month and during an annual military camp training of 20 to 30 days. The exact number of reservists is unknown because a relevant paragraph of the presidential decree which determines the number of reserve troops is classified. The military units manned by reservists are determined by General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, and this information is classified too. The persons who are in mobilization human resource may be enlisted to military camp trainings in peacetime. The duration of each training cannot exceed 2 months. Herewith the total duration of such trainings for the entire period of being in mobilization human resource cannot exceed 12 months, and a person may be enlisted in such training no more than once every 3 years. As of 2009, the number of citizens who can be used for mobilization deployment on an involuntary basis in the case of wartime mobilization was estimated at 31 million. Reservists are subject to mobilization in wartime first of all. Non-reservists are subject to mobilization secondarily. The mobilization of non-reservists is carried out by taking into account the age category under the Article 53 of Federal Law of March 28, 1998. No 53 FZ about military duty and military service, in order from first category to third category. The first category includes 1. The persons at any military rank below that of a commissioned officer and not reached the age of 35 years old. 2. The persons at any rank from junior lieutenant to captain inclusively and not reached the age of 50 years old. 3. The persons at any rank from major to lieutenant colonel inclusively and not reached the age of 55 years old. 4. The persons at the rank of colonel and not reached the age of 60 years old. 5. The persons at the rank of major general or higher and not reached the age of 65 years old. The second category includes 1. Enlisted personnel in age from 35 but less than 45. 2. Junior commissioned officers in the age from 50 but less than 55. 3. Commissioned officers at any rank from major to lieutenant colonel inclusively in the age from 55 but less than 60. 4. Commissioned officers at the rank of colonel in the age from 60 but less than 65. 5. Supreme officers in age from 65 but less than 70. The third category includes 1. Enlisted personnel in the age from 45 but less than 50. 2. Junior commissioned officers in the age from 55 but less than 60. 3. Commissioned officers at any rank from major to lieutenant colonel inclusively in the age from 60 but less than 65. 4. All females in the age less than 45 for enlisted personnel and less than 50 for commissioned officers. The person who has reached the age limit, established for the third category or higher, is retired and is not subject to mobilization. 2005-2008 Reform of the Reserve Officer Training System. The Reserve Officer Training System, inherited from the Soviet Union, involved selective conscription of graduates of civilian institutions of higher education, who have graduated the military departments of their alma maters and received a commission as an officer. Such person could be conscripted from the reserve of armed forces to active duty, up until the age of 27. The period of active duty of such an officer was several years, and at the end of that period he was due to be enlisted in the reserve of armed forces again. Such officers were called blazers in the Army's slang. In 2005, Minister of Defense Sergei Ivanov announced a significant reduction in the number of military departments carrying out the training commissioned officers from students of civilian institutions of higher education. By March 2008, 168 of 235 civilian universities, academies and institutions which previously had military departments had lost these units. 37 of 67 civilian universities, academies, and institutions which retained military departments became the basis for the establishment of new military training centers. The military training centers focused on training officers for active duty, whilst the military departments focused on training officers for the reserve. In 2006 the conscription of reserve officers was abolished. Graduates of military departments were not subject to conscription to active duty anymore. All graduates of military training centers were due to be enrolled for 3 years active duty upon their university graduation. 2018 beginning of formation of voluntary military reserve force. In 2018, Russia started a full-scale formation of a military reserve force based upon volunteers selected from among those who retired from active duty. The Russian military reserve force is a set of citizens who have signed a contract to perform military service as a reservist. They are appointed to a military position in a particular military unit. They are involved in all operational, mobilization, and combat activities of these military units, unlike other citizens who haven't signed such contracts and who can be used for a mobilization deployment of armed forces on an involuntary basis only in cases stipulated by law. The deployment of military units composed of reservists takes minimum time and does not requires any retraining of military personnel. The military units composed of reservists use the same weapons as used by military units, composed of active duty military personnel. Military units staffed by reservists are 100% manned up to wartime standards, just like military units staffed by active duty military personnel only. There is no possibility to define by military units designation what we're dealing with, reserve or not reserve military unit. The number of reservists is not presented in open sources and is not among the number of active duty military volunteers which is published by Ministry of Defense. This makes it difficult for establish real troop strength of new Russian military units and formations. 2019 Reform of the Reserve Officer Training System. In 2018 the military departments and the military training centers were abolished. From that moment on, students of civilian institutions of higher education were trained under both officers' training programs in the military training centers. In 2019, there were training military centers in 93 civilian institutions of higher education. Mobilization. The first mobilization of citizens being in mobilization human resource, conducted on a compulsory basis, in the Russian Federation's history was announced by Presidential Decree of September 21, 2022 647 during the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Budget. Between 1991 and 1997 newly independent Russia's defense spending fell by a factor of 8 in real prices. In 1998, when Russia experienced a severe financial crisis, its military expenditure in real terms reached its lowest point, barely 1/4 of the USSR's in 1991, and 2/5 of the level of 1992, the first year of Russia's independent existence. In the early 2000s, defense spending increased by at least a minimum of 1/3 year-on-year, leading to overall defense expenditure almost quadrupling over the past 6 years, and according to Finance Minister Alexei Kudrin, this rate is to be sustained through 2010. Official government military spending for 2005 was $32.4 billion, though various sources have estimated Russia's military expenditures to be considerably higher than the reported amount. Estimating Russian military expenditure is beset with difficulty. the annual IISS military balance has underscored the problem numerous times within its section on Russia. The IISS military balance comments, by simple observation, would appear to be lower than is suggested by the size of the armed forces or the structure of the military-industrial complex, and thus neither of the figures is particularly useful for comparative analysis. By some estimates, overall Russian defense expenditure is now at the second highest in the world after the USA. According to Alexander Kanchin, chairman of the Public Chamber of Russia on Affairs of Veterans, Military Personnel, and their families, the Russian military is losing up to $13 billion to corruption every year. On September 16, 2008, Russian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin announced that in 2009, Russia's defense budget would be increased to a record amount of $50 billion. On February 16, 2009, Russia's deputy defense minister said state defense contracts would not be subject to cuts this year. Despite the ongoing financial crisis, and that there would be no decrease in 2009. The budget would still be 1.376 trillion rubles, and in the current exchange rates this would amount to $41.5 billion. Later in February 2009, due to the world financial crisis, the Russian Parliament's Defense Committee stated that the Russian defense budget would instead be slashed by 15%, from $40 billion to $34 billion, with further cuts to come. On May 5, 2009, First Deputy Prime Minister Sergei Ivanov said that the defense budget for 2009 will be 1.3 trillion rubles. 322 billion rubles are allocated to purchase weapons, and the rest of the fund will be spent on construction, fuel storage, and food supply. According to the head of the Defense Committee of the State Duma Vladimir Komoyedov, Russia plans to spend 101.15 billion rubles on nuclear weapons in 2013-2015. The budget provisions under the Nuclear Weapons Complex section in 2013 to 2015 will amount to 29.28 billion rubles, 33.3 billion rubles and 38.57 billion rubles respectively, Komoyedov said, Vechernaya Moskva reports. Komoyedov added that in 2012 the spending on nuclear weapons made up 27.4 billion rubles. The draft law on the federal budget for 2013 and for the planning period of 2014 and 2015 will be discussed in the first reading on October 19, 2012, The Voice of Russia reports. In a meeting in Sochi in November 2013, President Putin said the country's defense budget will reach 2.3 trillion rubles, stressing the huge amount in comparison to the 2003 budget, which stood on 600 billion rubles. The Russian government's published 2014 military budget is about 2.49 trillion rubles, the fourth largest in the world behind the US, China and Saudi Arabia. The official budget is set to rise to 3.03 trillion rubles in 2015, and 3.36 trillion rubles in 2016. As of 2014, Russia's military budget is higher than any other European nation, and approximately 1/7 of the U.S. military budget. In 2015, SIPRI found that Russia was the world's second biggest exporter of major weapons for the period 2010-14, increasing exports by 37%. India, China, and Algeria accounted for almost 60% of total Russian exports. Asia and Oceania received 66% of Russian arms exports in 2010-14, Africa 12% and the Middle East 10%. In 2017, Russia was reported to have slashed its defense spending by 20%, due to calls by Vladimir Putin to spend money on other initiatives such as healthcare and education. The cut decreased Russia's military spending to $66.3 billion, in which Russia slumped to being the fourth highest military spender. Russia's 2019 defense budget was $48 billion and the 2020 figure was $61.7 billion. Procurement. About 70% of the former Soviet Union's defense industries are located in the Russian Federation. Many defense firms have been privatized, some have developed significant partnerships with firms in other countries. The recent steps towards modernization of the armed forces have been made possible by Russia's economic resurgence based on oil and gas revenues as well as strengthening of its own domestic market. Currently, the military is in the middle of a major equipment upgrade, with the government in the process of spending about $200 billion on development and production of military equipment between 2006 and 2015 under the State Armament Program for 2007-2015. Mainly as a result of lessons learned during the Russo-Georgian War, the State Armament Program for 2011-2020 was launched in December 2010. Prime Minister Putin announced that 1.5 trillion rubles will be allocated to purchase new hardware in the next 10 years. The aim is to have a growth of 30% of modern equipment in the Army, Navy, and Air Force by 2015, and of 70% by 2020. In some categories, the proportion of new weapon systems will reach 80% or even 100%. At this point, the Russian MOD plans to purchase, among others, up to 250 ICBMs, 800 aircraft, 1,200 helicopters, 44 submarines, 36 frigates, 28 corvettes, 18 cruisers, 24 destroyers, 6 aircraft carriers, and 62 air defense battalions. Several existing types will be upgraded. In total since 2012 and as of 2017, the armed forces received more than 30,000 units of new and modernized weapons and equipment, including more than 50 warships, 1,300 aircraft, over 1,800 drones, 4,700 tanks and armored combat vehicles compared to 2 warships, 151 aircraft, and 217 tanks received in 2007-2011. The Russian Army also receives 150-250 aircraft per year and over 300 short-range UAVs. As of 2011, Russia's chief military prosecutor said that 20% of the defense budget was being stolen or defrauded yearly. It is suspected that equipment is not properly maintained due to the resulting lack of funds, which may have contributed to equipment failures observed during the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. In 2018, RF armed forces adopted 35 types of weapons and military equipment and completed state tests of 21 more. The Russian Ministry of Defense was procured the Yasu-TZ battlefield management system that same year. The Yasu-TZ battlefield management system incorporates 11 subsystems that control artillery, electronic warfare systems, ground vehicles, air defense assets, engineering equipment, and logistics support. Among other things, 12 missile regiments have been rearmed with Yars ICBMs, 10 missile brigades with Iskander tactical ballistic missile systems, 13 aviation regiments with MiG-31BM, Su-35S, Su-30SM, and Su-34 combat aircraft, 3 Army aviation brigades and 6 helicopter regiments with Mi-28 and Ka-52 combat helicopters, 20 surface-to-air missile regiments with S-400 Triumph SAM systems, 23 batteries with Pantsir S self-propelled anti-aircraft gun missile systems, and 17 batteries with BAL and Bastion mobile coastal defense missile systems since 2012 and as of March 2019. Since 2012 and as of April 2021, the ground forces have received more than 15,500 pieces of weapon systems and equipment and rearmed all missile brigades with the Iskander tactical ballistic missile system. Aerospace Force and Naval Aviation have received over 1,500 aircraft and helicopters, and the Navy more than 190 ships, vessels, and boats. Since 2012 and as of December 2020, the number of long-range land, sea, and air-launched cruise missiles increased by 37 times. The number of their cruise missile carriers was also increased by 13 times. Nuclear weapons. As of January 2017, the Federation of American Scientists estimated that Russia has approximately 1,765 deployed strategic warheads, and another 2,700 non-deployed strategic and deployed and non-deployed tactical warheads, plus an additional 2,510 warheads awaiting dismantlement. Russia's Strategic Rocket Forces controls its land-based nuclear warheads, while the Navy controls the submarine-based missiles and the Aerospace Forces the air-launched warheads. Russia's nuclear warheads are deployed in 4 areas. Land-based immobile, like R-36 and its replacement Rs-28 Sarma. Land-based mobile, like RT-2PM2 Topol-M and new Rs-24 Yars. Submarine-based, like R-29 RMU-2 Laner and RSM-56 Bulava. Air-launched warheads of the Russian Air Force's Long-Range Aviation Command. The military doctrine of Russia sees NATO expansion as one of the threats for the Russian Federation and reserves the right to use nuclear weapons in response to a conventional aggression that can endanger the existence of the state. In keeping with this, the country's nuclear forces received adequate funding throughout the late 1990s. The number of intercontinental ballistic missiles and warheads on active duty has declined over the years, in part in keeping with arms limitation agreements with the US and in part due to insufficient spending on maintenance, but this is balanced by the deployment of new missiles as proof against missile defenses. Russia has developed the new RT-2PM2 Topol-M missiles that a Russian general claimed to be able to penetrate any missile defense, including the planned US national missile defense. The missile can change course in both air and space to avoid countermeasures. It is designed to be launched from land-based, mobile TEL units. Because of international awareness of the danger that Russian nuclear technology might fall into the hands of terrorists or rogue officers who it was feared might want to use nuclear weapons to threaten or attack other countries, the federal government of the United States and many other countries provided considerable financial assistance to the Russian nuclear forces in the early 1990s. This money went in part to finance decommissioning of warheads under international agreements, such the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, but also to improve security and personnel training in Russian nuclear facilities. In the late evening of September 11, 2007, the fuel-air explosive FMOR, father of all bombs, was successfully field-tested. According to the Russian military, the new weapon will replace several smaller types of nuclear bombs in its arsenal. See also: Military academies in Russia, Military commissioning schools in Russia, Reserve officer training in Russia, Warrant officer schools of the Russian Armed Forces, Adjunctura in Russia, Awards and emblems of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, Uniforms of the Russian Armed Forces, Military Band Service of the Armed Forces of Russia, History of Russian military ranks, Army ranks and insignia of the Russian Federation, Naval ranks and insignia of the Russian Federation. References